Why do certain psychology tricks make avoidance come back when nothing else works? Sometimes the smallest changes in how you act around someone completely shift how they see you. Not dramatic moves, just different responses to familiar situations. With avoidance, these small response changes matter even more. The way you handle their distance directly impacts whether they move closer or pull further away. It's not about fixing them. It's about adjusting what you're doing. Today, I'll be walking you through 7 specific reverse psychology approaches that change how avoidants experience the relationship. Each one addresses a different trigger point in their distancing pattern. If you've been the one always pursuing, always initiating, always trying harder while they pull back, these strategies will completely change your approach. The first approach involves stopping emotional pursuit when they shut down. Avoidants disconnect emotionally as a defense mechanism. They feel something uncomfortable and immediately create internal distance. The usual response is to try to draw them back out through questions, reassurance, or emotional discussion. What's wrong? Did I do something? We need to talk about this. Every one of these attempts pushes them further into their shell. Emotional pursuit triggers their core fear that relationships mean being overwhelmed by someone else's needs and feelings. Stopping emotional pursuit doesn't mean being cold or distant yourself. It means giving them space to process without adding your emotional energy to the situation. When they shut down, you stay present, but you don't chase their feelings. You remain consistent in your own behavior without demanding they open up or explain themselves. This creates safety. Avoidants need to know they can have their internal experience without someone trying to manage it, fix it, or force them to share it. When you stop pursuing their emotions, they feel less trapped. The irony is that this space often allows them to reconnect on their own. Without pressure to perform emotionally, they find it easier to actually feel and eventually share what's happening inside them. The second approach centers on maintaining your own life when they withdraw. Avoidants test boundaries by creating distance. They pull back to see what happens, to check if the other person will spiral, chase, or remain stable. When someone cancels plans and you immediately clear your schedule waiting for them to reschedule, that sends a message. It tells them you're available whenever they decide to show up, that your life revolves around their availability. This intensifies their discomfort because it confirms their fear that closeness means losing independence. Maintaining your own life means actually having plans when they resurface. You make commitments with friends, you schedule activities, you fill your time with things that matter to you. When an avoidant reaches out after a period of distance, you're not always immediately available. Not because you're pretending to be busy, but because you genuinely are. This shift changes the dynamic completely. They start seeing you as someone with a full life who isn't sitting around waiting for them to decide when connection happens. That perception makes you more appealing, not less. Avoidants are drawn to people who don't need them to be whole, who have their own world that exists independently. When you demonstrate that through your actions, they experience less pressure and more genuine interest. The third approach involves matching their energy instead of compensating for their withdrawal. When avoidants pull back, the automatic response is to increase effort. They text less, so you text more. They cancel plans, so you suggest alternatives. They seem distant, so you try harder to connect. This compensation creates an imbalance that avoidants can feel. They're already uncomfortable with closeness, and when someone starts putting in twice the effort they're giving, that discomfort intensifies. The relationship starts feeling lopsided, with one person doing all the work while the other retreats further. Matching their energy means responding at the same level they're offering. If they take a day to respond, you take a day to respond. If they suggest plans once a week, you suggest plans at that same frequency. If their messages are brief, yours are equally brief. This isn't about punishing them or playing games. It's about removing the pressure that comes from unequal investment. When you stop overcompensating, avoidants notice the shift. The relationship no longer feels like something they need to manage or escape from. There's space to breathe, and in that space, their nervous system can relax. Without the weight of someone else's excessive effort, they often find themselves moving closer on their own terms. The fourth approach focuses on being genuinely comfortable with distance. Most people say they're fine with space, but their behavior shows otherwise. They agree to give an avoidant room, then spend that time anxiously monitoring the relationship, checking their phone constantly, analyzing every small interaction, waiting for signs of reconnection. Avoidants can sense this anxiety even when it's not directly expressed. Being genuinely comfortable with distance means actually using that time for yourself. You engage with your own interests, you connect with other people, you live your life without the relationship being the center of your thoughts. This isn't about pretending you don't care. It's about having enough security and self-focus that temporary distance doesn't destabilize you. When you demonstrate real comfort with space, avoidants feel it. The relationship stops being something that demands constant attention and emotional labor. They can step back without worrying about fallout, and paradoxically, that freedom often makes them want to step forward. Distance becomes something neutral, rather than something weighted with tension, and in that neutrality, they find room to actually miss you and choose closeness. The fifth approach involves letting them initiate after withdrawal. When an avoidant creates distance, the reflex is to be the one who reaches back out, who breaks the silence, who rebuilds the bridge. This puts you in the position of always being the connector, always managing the relationship's continuation. It also reinforces their pattern of withdrawing and waiting for someone else to do the work of reconnection. Letting them initiate means you don't reach out after they've pulled back. You don't send a friendly check-in text. You don't suggest getting together. You don't break the silence to ease the tension. You wait for them to make the move. This shift is uncomfortable at first because it means accepting uncertainty. You don't know if they'll reach out, when they'll reach out, or what they'll say when they do. But this discomfort is necessary for changing the dynamic. When avoidants have to be the one to initiate contact, they experience the relationship differently. They can't just retreat and wait for someone to pull them back. They have to decide whether they want connection enough to move toward it themselves. This creates accountability. It also shows them that you're not going to chase them endlessly. Some avoidants won't reach out, and that tells you something important about their capacity for effort. The ones who do reach out often return with more investment because they had to take an active step rather than just responding to someone else's pursuit. The sixth approach centers on showing zero reaction to their hot and cold behavior. Avoidants cycle between closeness and distance. They lean in, then pull back. They're warm and engaged, then suddenly withdrawn and unavailable. This inconsistency is their way of managing discomfort with intimacy. The typical response is to react to these shifts with visible emotion: hurt, confusion, frustration, anxiety. When they pull back, you show that it bothers you. When they lean back in, you show relief and increased investment. These reactions make the cycle worse because they add weight to every move the avoidant makes. Showing zero reaction means you remain steady regardless of their temperature. When they're warm, you're consistently yourself. When they're cold, you're still consistently yourself. You don't celebrate their closeness or mourn their distance. Your emotional state doesn't hinge on where they are in their cycle. This steadiness changes everything for an avoidant. They're used to people who respond dramatically to their shifts, which confirms their belief that relationships are unstable and demanding. When you don't react, they experience something different. The cycle loses its power. They can't use distance as a way to test your stability or gauge your investment because you remain stable either way. This often disrupts their pattern entirely. Without the reaction they're expecting, the push-pull loses its function. They start questioning why they're creating distance in the first place when it doesn't produce the usual results. The seventh approach involves redirecting your focus entirely when they withdraw. Most people stay mentally locked on the avoidant even during periods of distance. They wonder what the person is doing, thinking, feeling. They analyze past conversations for clues. They plan what they'll say when contact resumes. This mental focus keeps you tethered to someone who isn't present, and it shows in your energy when they do return. Redirecting your focus means genuinely shifting your attention elsewhere. You invest in your work, your friendships, your hobbies, your personal growth. You fill your mental space with things that have nothing to do with the avoidant or the relationship. This isn't forced distraction. It's authentic re-engagement with your own life. When an avoidant comes back and finds that you've genuinely moved your focus, it registers. You're not the same person who was waiting, hoping, analyzing. You've been living. This shift makes them realize they're not the center of your world, that their withdrawal didn't stop your life or happiness. That realization often creates urgency. Avoidants are drawn to people who don't collapse in their absence, who have enough going on that the relationship is a part of their life rather than the foundation of it. When you demonstrate through your energy and actions that you redirected your focus, they often respond by trying to reclaim some of that attention. These 7 approaches work because they address the fundamental dynamic that keeps avoidance distant. Relationship pressure, even when well-intentioned, triggers their withdrawal. When you remove that pressure through behavioral changes, you create space for them to experience the relationship differently. They're not managing someone else's needs, defending against emotional demands, or trying to escape constant pursuit. Instead, they're interacting with someone who has their own stability, their own life, their own ability to be comfortable with distance. That changes the entire equation. Avoidants come back to people who don't make closeness feel overwhelming, who demonstrate through consistent action that connection doesn't mean loss of self or constant emotional labor. The key to using these approaches successfully lies in genuine implementation. If you're matching energy but secretly keeping score, avoidance will sense the resentment. If you're maintaining your own life but doing it performatively to get their attention, it won't have the same impact. If you're comfortable with distance but constantly anxious underneath, that anxiety leaks through. These strategies work when they reflect actual shifts in how you relate to the relationship. You're not performing indifference. You're cultivating real security. You're not faking comfort with space. You're building a life full enough that space doesn't devastate you. You're not pretending their withdrawal doesn't matter. You're developing the stability to let them have their process without it destroying yours. Timing matters when implementing these approaches. If an avoidant has completely checked out, no amount of behavioral change will bring them back if they've decided they're done. These techniques work best when someone is in their typical push-pull pattern, when they're cycling through their usual withdrawal and return. They're also more effective earlier in the dynamic, before patterns have become deeply entrenched and resentment has built on both sides. The goal isn't to manipulate someone into wanting you. It's to remove the barriers that keep them at a distance so they can make clear choices about the relationship. Some relationships with avoidance won't survive these changes, and that's important information. When you stop overcompensating, some avoidants won't step up. When you let them initiate, some won't reach out. When you maintain your own life, some will take that as confirmation that they should fully exit. These outcomes tell you that the relationship was surviving on your effort alone, that the avoidant wasn't willing or able to meet you with reciprocal investment. That's valuable data. It's better to know early that someone won't show up for the relationship than to spend years chasing someone who's running away. The approaches work best in combination rather than isolation. Matching their energy while also maintaining your own life creates a stronger effect than either approach alone. Stopping emotional pursuit while also showing zero reaction to their cycles reinforces the message that you're not going to engage with their distancing patterns. Being comfortable with distance while letting them initiate puts the responsibility for connection on both people rather than just one. These strategies create a comprehensive shift in the relationship dynamic rather than just adjusting one element. Understanding your own attachment patterns matters when implementing these approaches. If you lean anxious in relationships, these techniques will feel uncomfortable because they go against your instinct to pursue and connect. You'll need to work on your own security to implement them genuinely rather than just white-knuckling through the discomfort. If you lean secure, these approaches might feel more natural because they align with how secure people already relate, with comfort around space, without excessive pursuit, with their own life as a foundation. The more you can cultivate your own secure attachment, the more effective these strategies become because they stop being strategies and start being your actual way of relating. Context matters in every relationship. These approaches assume you're dealing with someone who has avoidant patterns, but who also has capacity for growth and connection. If someone is dismissive to the point of cruelty, consistently disrespectful, or showing signs they genuinely don't want the relationship, these techniques aren't appropriate. They're designed for situations where the barrier is discomfort with intimacy, not absence of care or respect. You can't reverse psychology someone into treating you well if they simply don't value you or the relationship. The success of these approaches also depends on your own goals. If you're using them to try to force a specific outcome, they'll likely backfire. Avoidance can sense agenda and manipulation, and it triggers more withdrawal. If you're using them as a genuine shift in how you relate, removing pressure not to control them, but to create healthier dynamics, they're more likely to work. Your intention shows in your energy, and avoidants are particularly sensitive to detecting when someone is trying to manage their behavior. These strategies require patience. Avoidants don't shift their patterns overnight. You might implement every one of these approaches and still see the same withdrawal initially. Change takes time, and avoidants need to experience the new dynamic consistently before they start responding differently. If you try these techniques for a week and then revert to old patterns because you're not seeing immediate results, you'll undermine your own efforts. Consistency over time is what creates lasting change in relationship dynamics. Your own well-being needs to remain the priority throughout this process. Using these approaches should make your life better, not worse. If you're genuinely comfortable with distance because you're living a full life, you're gaining value regardless of whether the avoidant comes back. If you're maintaining your own world, you're building something meaningful for yourself. If you're stopping emotional pursuit, you're conserving your energy for where it's reciprocated. These strategies should serve you first and potentially affect the relationship second. The moment they become about sacrificing your own needs or happiness to manage someone else's patterns, you've lost the plot. The question of whether these approaches actually work depends partly on the avoidant's level of self-awareness and willingness to engage with their patterns. Some avoidants recognize their withdrawal tendencies and actively work on them. With those people, creating space and removing pressure often allows them to do that work and return with more capacity for closeness. Other avoidants have no awareness of their patterns and no interest in examining them. With those people, these approaches might create temporary shifts but won't result in lasting change because the person isn't doing their own internal work. Part of what makes these techniques effective is that they create natural consequences for avoidant behavior. When someone withdraws and you continue living your life happily, they experience the reality that their absence doesn't devastate you. When they cycle between hot and cold and you remain steady, they lose the power that inconsistency usually gives them. When they expect you to chase and you don't, they face the choice of either putting in effort themselves or losing the connection. These natural consequences teach avoidants something important about relationships, that they require mutual effort, that withdrawal has costs, that you can't maintain connection while constantly creating distance. The learning happens through experience rather than through explanation or argument, which makes it more likely to actually shift behavior. Another element that strengthens these approaches is that they force both people to see the relationship more clearly. When you stop compensating for an avoidant's low effort, you get real information about their actual level of investment. When you let them initiate, you learn whether they're willing to move toward connection or if they only engage when pulled. When you maintain your own life, you discover if they're attracted to you as a person or just comfortable with someone who makes them the center of their world. This clarity benefits everyone involved. You're not guessing about someone's interest or capacity, you're seeing it demonstrated through their choices and actions. These techniques also protect you from the gradual erosion of self that happens in pursue-withdraw dynamics. When you're constantly chasing someone, adjusting yourself to manage their comfort, making yourself smaller to reduce their anxiety about closeness, you lose touch with who you are outside the relationship. By maintaining your own life, staying consistent regardless of their cycles, and letting them take responsibility for connection, you preserve your sense of self. You remain grounded in your own identity, needs, and worth. That groundedness is attractive to avoidance, but more importantly, it keeps you healthy regardless of what happens with the relationship. Ultimately, reverse psychology with avoidance isn't about tricking them into connection. It's about removing the elements of pursuit and pressure that trigger their withdrawal, creating space for them to choose closeness without feeling trapped by it. When these approaches work, they work because the avoidant experiences the relationship as something different, less demanding, less suffocating, less threatening to their autonomy. That shift allows their nervous system to relax enough to actually want connection, rather than constantly defending against it. If you've been stuck in the pursue-withdraw cycle with an avoidant, trying these approaches gives you information either way. Either the avoidant responds to the reduced pressure by moving closer, which tells you there's potential for the relationship to evolve. Or they don't respond, they continue withdrawing, or they exit entirely, which tells you they weren't willing or able to meet you with reciprocal effort. Both outcomes are valuable. One gives you a path forward with better dynamics. The other gives you clarity that lets you stop investing in something that wasn't working. Leave a comment sharing your experience with avoidant patterns in relationships. Have you noticed any of these dynamics playing out? What happened when you tried creating more space instead of pursuing? I'd love to hear your perspective. If this video helped you understand something about your relationship dynamics, hit the like button and subscribe for more content on attachment patterns and relationship psychology. Thanks for watching.